my God! Look at that robot arm! Are you trying to save the world or something installing this thing?
A cup of black coffee. Large.
Barista mocked. Veteran's prosthetic arm. Then Marines at corner table. Made her regret it. Former Corporal Maria Santos approached the counter of Coastal Coffee at 0800 on Saturday morning. Her advanced prosthetic arm drawing snickers from barista Ashley Miller, who saw only a disability, not the heroism that created it, in 5 minutes. When 4 Marines at the corner table stood in formation, Ashley's cruelty would meet military justice. Maria, 31, appears to be another disabled customer navigating daily life with visible prosthetic limb. But her confident bearing and precise movements reveal military training that civilian mockery cannot diminish. Her artificial arm tells a story of sacrifice that coffee shop employees will never understand until it's too late. What happened at the coffee counter would expose how quickly civilian cruelty could be answered by military brotherhood, and how one veteran's sacrifice connected her to protectors she didn't know were watching. Coastal Coffee in Oceanside, California, a popular chain coffee shop located near Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, serving a diverse clientele of civilians, military personnel, and veterans who blend seamlessly into the community. The establishment operates with typical corporate efficiency, prioritizing speed and profit over customer dignity or respect. The civilian service environment often fails to recognize military personnel who dress in civilian clothes, creating situations where employees mock or discriminate against individuals whose service they can't identify. Young baristas, focused on social media trends and peer approval, frequently lack the maturity or education to recognize sacrifice when it's standing in front of them. Recent social media culture has normalized public mockery of disabilities and differences, creating environments where employees feel entitled to comment on customers' appearances for entertainment. This setting represents the dangerous intersection where civilian ignorance meets military sacrifice, creating situations where heroes face humiliation from those they've protected. Maria enlisted in the Marines at 19 to escape poverty in East LA, serving as a combat engineer specializing in explosive ordnance disposal. During her second deployment to Iraq in 2017, her unit was clearing IEDs from a school when insurgents attacked with coordinated explosives. Maria shielded 4 younger Marines from a secondary blast, losing her right arm but saving their lives through her quick tactical thinking and selfless positioning. Her Medal of Valor and Purple Heart citations couldn't replace her limb, but they represented the lives she'd preserved through her sacrifice. Medically retired with disability compensation, Maria studies computer science at nearby UC San Diego while adjusting to civilian life that often feels alien after military brotherhood and purpose. Her advanced prosthetic arm represents cutting-edge technology that enables most daily activities, though phantom pain and psychological adjustment remain ongoing challenges. She frequents Coastal Coffee as part of establishing normal routines, unaware that her quiet presence inspires other veterans, while her sacrifice goes unrecognized by civilian employees who see only disability rather than heroism. Despite her injury, Maria retains complete military bearing and tactical awareness that civilian life cannot erase. Her prosthetic arm functions with remarkable precision, controlled through neural interfaces that represent the latest advances in military medical technology. Maria's greatest strength is maintaining dignity and purpose despite public reactions to her injury, using her experience to help other wounded veterans while pursuing education that will enable continued service through technology careers. Her military identity remains strong, providing psychological foundation for overcoming daily challenges that civilians cannot understand or appreciate. Maria must navigate civilian service environments where her prosthetic arm triggers ignorant reactions from employees who see disability rather than heroism, creating daily confrontations that test her emotional resilience and commitment to peaceful civilian integration. The primary obstacle is civilian ignorance about military sacrifice and disability rights, preventing Maria from receiving basic human dignity during routine activities that should not require explanation or justification of her service-related injury. The stakes involve both personal dignity and broader veteran treatment. Maria's response to discrimination influences how other wounded veterans are perceived and treated, while civilian reactions determine whether military sacrifice receives appropriate recognition and respect from communities that benefit from such service. This conflict represents the challenge facing wounded veterans whose visible injuries make them targets for civilian mockery, while their heroic service remains invisible to those whose freedom they preserved through personal sacrifice. Maria's decision to patronize Coastal Coffee represented her ongoing effort to establish normal civilian routines while managing the daily challenges of prosthetic adaptation and public reactions to her visible injury that most people couldn't understand or appreciate. Just get coffee like everyone else, Maria reminded herself while approaching the counter, determined to maintain the dignity and normalcy that civilian life required despite the stares and comments that her prosthetic arm inevitably attracted from ignorant observers. Her morning ritual represented more than caffeine dependency. It was psychological therapy that proved she could navigate civilian society despite the injury that had ended her military career, but couldn't eliminate her determination to contribute meaningfully to communities she'd served. Most people are decent when they understand, Maria told herself while observing the busy coffee shop that represented the American civilian life she'd sacrificed her arm to protect, hoping that education could overcome ignorance. The interaction would test whether civilian service workers possessed the basic human decency that military training emphasized, or whether her sacrifice would be mocked by those who benefited from freedoms that wounded veterans had preserved through personal cost that most civilians could never understand or appreciate. Maria's preparation for civilian interactions included psychological strategies for managing public reactions to her prosthetic arm, while maintaining the dignity and composure that military training had instilled despite provocation from ignorant civilians. Her approach emphasized patience and education over confrontation, using encounters as opportunities to demonstrate that wounded veterans deserved respect rather than mockery, while showing that disabilities didn't diminish human worth or military service value. Most critically, Maria prepared for the emotional challenge of facing daily reminders that her sacrifice was invisible to civilians who saw only disability rather than heroism, requiring constant psychological resilience to maintain civilian integration goals. Her prosthetic arm maintenance and operation required technical preparation that most civilians couldn't understand: neural interface calibration, battery management, and precision control systems that represented cutting-edge military medical technology developed specifically for wounded warriors. Maria also prepared standard responses to common questions and comments about her prosthetic, balancing privacy rights with educational opportunities that could improve civilian understanding of military injuries and veteran experiences. Her documentation of discriminatory incidents provided evidence for disability rights advocacy while protecting other wounded veterans from similar treatment through legal precedent and public awareness that could prevent future discrimination. Maria entered Coastal Coffee during peak morning hours, immediately noticing the 4 Marines in civilian clothes at the corner table, whose military bearing was obvious to her trained eye despite their attempt to blend into civilian environment. The Marines, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Corporals Johnson and Kim, and Lance Corporal Martinez, were enjoying weekend liberty while discussing their upcoming deployment, unaware that they were about to witness discrimination against a wounded veteran whose service had directly saved Marines like themselves. Maria approached the counter where Barista Ashley Miller processed orders with typical millennial efficiency, focused more on social media notifications than customer service excellence that previous generations had considered professional standard. "Large coffee, black, please," Maria requested while positioning her prosthetic arm naturally on the counter, not attempting to hide the injury that represented her military service and sacrifice for American freedom. Ashley's immediate reaction revealed the ignorance and immaturity that would transform routine transaction into life lesson. Her obvious stare at Maria's prosthetic arm, followed by whispered comments to co-worker Jason about weird robot arm that demonstrated complete lack of professional courtesy and human decency. The Marines noticed Ashley's unprofessional behavior while recognizing Maria's military bearing, creating a situation where civilian cruelty would meet military justice through witnesses who understood sacrifice. Barista Ashley Miller's unprofessional behavior escalated when she made obvious jokes about Maria's prosthetic arm to co-worker Jason, using terms like robot arm and cyborg customer that demonstrated complete ignorance about military injuries and basic human decency. "Check out the Terminator ordering coffee," Ashley whispered loudly enough for nearby customers to hear while pointing at Maria's advanced prosthetic. Her mockery revealed juvenile mentality that equated difference with entertainment rather than recognizing disability as potential evidence of service and sacrifice that deserved respect, rather than ridicule from civilian employees who benefited from military protection. Ashley's cruelty intensified when she questioned Maria's prosthetic arm's cleanliness for food service areas, claiming health code violations that didn't exist while demonstrating discriminatory treatment based on disability that violated both federal law and basic human dignity. "I'm not sure that thing should be near food preparation," Ashley announced while refusing to complete Maria's order, creating illegal discrimination that the 4 Marines witnessed with growing anger at civilian treatment of wounded veteran. Her actions revealed systematic ignorance about disability rights, while exposing the kind of prejudice that wounded veterans faced daily from civilians who lacked education about military sacrifice. The situation reached crisis when Ashley publicly refused service to Maria, claiming her prosthetic arm created unsanitary conditions that threatened public health, demonstrating complete ignorance of federal disability law while humiliating wounded veteran in front of witnesses who understood military service value. "We can't serve customers with artificial body parts," Ashley declared, while violating Americans with Disabilities Act and creating hostile environment based on discriminatory assumptions about prosthetic technology. Her refusal constituted illegal discrimination that the Marines could no longer ignore, as civilian cruelty toward wounded veteran triggered military protective instincts that would transform Ashley's ignorance into educational experience. The coffee shop's morning crowd began noticing Ashley's discriminatory treatment of Maria, while the four Marines exchanged glances that revealed their growing anger at civilian mockery of wounded veteran whose sacrifice they recognized through professional military experience. Other customers started recording the interaction on phones, capturing Ashley's violations of disability law while documenting discrimination that would soon become viral evidence of civilian ignorance about military sacrifice and veteran treatment. Coffee shop manager Dave Wilson remained in back office, unaware that his employee was creating legal liability and public relations disaster through discriminatory behavior that violated corporate policy, federal law, and basic human decency. Ashley's co-worker Jason encouraged her mockery through laughter and additional comments, creating hostile environment that demonstrated systematic problems with employee training about disability rights and customer service professionalism. The Marines' table conversation stopped as they focused entirely on Ashley's treatment of Maria, their military training recognizing wounded veteran who deserved respect rather than ridicule from civilians who couldn't understand the sacrifice that prosthetic limbs represented. Social media posts about the incident began appearing in real time as customers shared Ashley's discriminatory behavior, creating public attention that would soon transform local incident into national conversation about veteran treatment. Facing public humiliation while maintaining dignity tested every lesson military training had taught Maria about honor under adverse conditions while protecting the reputation of all wounded veterans. Through her response to civilian cruelty, Ashley's discrimination forced Maria to balance individual rights against broader veteran advocacy, using her experience as educational opportunity while documenting violations that could protect other wounded veterans from similar treatment. Her response to illegal discrimination revealed character developed through military service. She maintained composure while facing personal attacks, applied strategic thinking to civilian challenges, and prioritized mission success, advancing veteran rights over personal satisfaction, confronting ignorance directly. The confrontation crystallized Maria's understanding of civilian-military divide. Her sacrifice meant nothing to individuals who couldn't recognize military service or appreciate the freedoms that wounded veterans had preserved through personal cost. Maria's military identity strengthened under attack, reminding her that her worth came from service to principles larger than civilian approval, and that her response to discrimination would influence how future wounded veterans were treated by civilian businesses. Her prosthetic arm became symbol of resilience rather than disability, representing technological advancement and military medical innovation that enabled continued service despite combat injuries that would have ended previous generations' military careers. As Ashley's discrimination escalated to complete service refusal based on disability, the situation approached the point where federal law violations would trigger legal consequences, while the Marines' patience reached limits that military training had established for protecting wounded veterans. Maria's documentation of Ashley's statements created evidence for Americans with Disabilities Act violation, while her dignified response contrasted sharply with Ashley's obvious prejudice and professional incompetence. The four Marines recognized classic discrimination scenario that required intervention to protect wounded veteran while educating civilian employees about military sacrifice and federal disability rights that protected service members. Ashley's continued mockery, despite obvious customer discomfort, demonstrated complete lack of professional judgment while creating viral content that would soon attract national attention to her. Discriminatory behavior. Coffee shop security cameras recorded Ashley's violations, while customer phone videos documented her discriminatory statements, creating permanent evidence that would influence legal proceedings and public awareness campaigns. The convergence of disability discrimination, military witnesses, and social media documentation created perfect storm that would transform Ashley's ignorant cruelty into national conversation about veteran treatment and civilian responsibility to respect military sacrifice. Ashley's discrimination reached its peak when she loudly announced to the entire coffee shop that she would not serve customers with fake body parts because they violated health codes, creating public spectacle that humiliated Maria while violating federal disability law in front of multiple witnesses. I don't care what anyone says. That robot arm is unsanitary, and I'm not putting other customers at risk, Ashley declared while pointing at Maria's prosthetic with obvious disgust that revealed complete ignorance about advanced military medical technology and legal protections for disabled veterans. Her public refusal to serve Maria created illegal discrimination based on disability, while demonstrating the kind of civilian ignorance that wounded veterans faced daily from people who benefited from military protection but couldn't recognize the sacrifice that prosthetic limbs represented. Ma'am, you need to leave because we can't accommodate your condition, Ashley announced, while violating Americans with Disabilities Act and creating hostile environment that other customers recognized as obviously illegal and morally reprehensible. Maria faced impossible choice: leave quietly and accept discrimination that would validate Ashley's ignorance, or stand firm for disability rights while potentially creating confrontation that could affect other wounded veterans' treatment in civilian establishments. The four Marines at the corner table had heard enough civilian cruelty directed at wounded veteran whose sacrifice they could identify through military experience, creating situation where Ashley's ignorance would meet military justice administered by witnesses who understood the true cost of freedom. The crisis represented everything wrong with civilian treatment of military personnel: ignorance about sacrifice, discrimination against disabilities earned through service, and complete lack of respect for individuals who had literally given limbs to protect American freedoms that Ashley exercised carelessly. Standing in the middle of coastal coffee facing illegal discrimination and public humiliation. Maria confronted the fundamental choice between accepting civilian cruelty or fighting back in ways that would influence how all wounded veterans were treated by ignorant service workers. The safe choice was retreat, leave quietly, avoid confrontation, and hope that individual education might eventually improve civilian understanding without creating public incident that could attract unwanted attention to her disability and military service. But Maria realized that Ashley's discrimination represented systematic problem affecting countless wounded veterans who faced similar treatment from civilians who saw only disability rather than heroism, creating environments where military sacrifice was mocked rather than respected. If I don't fight this, every wounded veteran will face the same discrimination, Maria thought, while Ashley continued her illegal refusal to provide service based on disability that represented military sacrifice rather than personal limitation. Her decision crystallized around military values duty to protect other veterans from discrimination, honor that demanded accountability for illegal treatment, and service that extended beyond personal comfort to institutional change that could benefit all disabled service members. The ultimate stakes transcended individual dignity to involve systematic reform, whether wounded veterans would continue accepting civilian discrimination in silence, or whether disability rights law would finally protect military sacrifice from ignorant mockery by service workers who lacked basic human decency. Maria's choice would determine whether Ashley's ignorance became learning experience or continued pattern of discrimination that affected wounded veterans throughout civilian society that benefited from their sacrifice but refused to show appropriate respect. Maria made the choice that would transform Ashley's cruelty into educational opportunity, stand firm for disability rights, while maintaining dignity that would contrast sharply with Ashley's obvious prejudice and professional incompetence. "Ma'am, your refusal to serve me based on my prosthetic arm violates federal disability law," Maria announced with military bearing that commanded attention from everyone present, while Ashley realized her mockery had targeted someone who understood legal rights and wouldn't accept discrimination quietly. Her transformation from patient customer to assertive advocate created immediate shift in coffee shop dynamics as other customers recognized illegal discrimination while Ashley's co-workers began distancing themselves from obviously problematic behavior. But Maria's assertion of rights created new complications as Ashley's pride prevented acknowledgement of mistakes that were becoming more expensive with every second of continued discrimination against wounded veteran who possessed both legal knowledge and military bearing. "I don't care what laws you think protect your robot arm," Ashley responded while creating additional evidence of discrimination that federal investigators would use in civil rights case against coffee shop and individual employee. Maria's patience had ended and her documentation was complete. Ashley's career in customer service was over, and her discrimination would become case study in the cost of mocking military sacrifice. The 4 Marines at the corner table had reached their limit watching civilian discrimination against wounded veteran whose sacrifice they recognized through professional military experience and personal understanding of combat injuries that ended careers but not service commitment to protecting others. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez made the decision for his team, Marines. Time to educate this civilian about respect. His quiet command activated military brotherhood that transcended rank, deployment status, or personal convenience when wounded veterans faced discrimination from ignorant civilians. The Marines' synchronous movement from relaxed liberty posture to military bearing created immediate atmospheric change in the coffee shop, as their coordinated response demonstrated the kind of unit cohesion that combat deployments had forged through shared sacrifice and mutual protection. "Ma'am, we need to have a conversation," Rodriguez announced while approaching the counter where Ashley continued her illegal discrimination, unaware that her mockery had attracted attention from witnesses whose authority and knowledge would expose her complete ignorance about military service. Ashley's confident cruelty was about to meet military reality that would transform her discrimination into education about the cost of mocking sacrifice, administered by Marines who understood exactly what Maria's prosthetic arm represented through personal combat experience. The Marines' approach created immediate tension as Ashley faced 4 men whose military bearing and obvious unit coordination suggested authority and knowledge that her civilian ignorance couldn't comprehend or challenge effectively. "Gentlemen, this doesn't concern you," Ashley attempted, while failing to recognize military bearing that immediately identified combat veterans whose experience exceeded her understanding of service, sacrifice, and the meaning of prosthetic limbs earned through combat injuries. Rodriguez's response carried military authority that commanded attention. "Ma'am, discriminating against wounded veterans concerns every Marine. That woman's prosthetic arm represents service and sacrifice that you clearly don't understand or respect." Ashley's co-workers began recognizing the seriousness of situation as 4 Marines in formation provided testimony about military service, while customers started recording what was obviously becoming educational moment about veteran treatment and disability rights. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ashley protested, while her discrimination faced military witnesses who could articulate exactly why her behavior violated legal, moral, and ethical standards that decent human beings maintained regardless of their service experience. The coffee shop fell silent as civilian ignorance prepared to meet military education about respect, sacrifice, and the meaning of prosthetic limbs that represented heroism rather than disability. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez began the Marines' educational intervention with professional military bearing that immediately established credibility and authority that Ashley's civilian status couldn't challenge or dismiss through continued ignorance. "Ma'am, I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps. The woman you're discriminating against is a wounded veteran whose prosthetic arm represents military service and sacrifice that protected your freedom to mock her in this coffee shop." His identification created immediate credibility while establishing context for Ashley's discrimination that transformed her mockery from simple rudeness to unpatriotic disrespect for military sacrifice that decent Americans couldn't tolerate or ignore. That prosthetic arm didn't come from accident or birth defect. Rodriguez continued while educating Ashley about combat injuries that civilians couldn't understand. It came from military service that protected American freedoms you exercise without appreciation or understanding. Ashley's confident discrimination began wavering as military authority challenged her ignorance with facts about service and sacrifice that her civilian experience couldn't refute or minimize. Through continued mockery, the Marine's testimony created immediate complications for Ashley, as her discrimination faced professional military witnesses whose combat experience provided authority that civilian ignorance couldn't challenge through continued mockery or deflection. Corporal Johnson added personal testimony that Marine lost her arm protecting other service members during combat operations. Your mockery dishonors military sacrifice while violating federal disability law that protects wounded veterans. Ashley attempted damage control. I didn't know she was military. But Rodriguez corrected her misunderstanding. Military service doesn't excuse discrimination. Human decency should prevent mockery of disabled individuals regardless of how they acquired their injuries. The Marines' coordinated testimony demonstrated unit cohesion that civilian employees couldn't understand while creating educational environment where Ashley's ignorance faced systematic correction from qualified authorities. Lance Corporal Martinez provided technical education. Modern military prosthetics represent cutting-edge medical technology that enables wounded veterans to maintain independent lives. Your health code claims reveal complete ignorance about advanced medical devices. Ashley's discrimination collapsed under military testimony that exposed her ignorance while educating civilian observers about veteran issues and disability rights that protected service members from exactly the treatment she had provided. The climactic revelation occurred when Corporal Kim disclosed that Maria had lost her arm saving Marines during combat operations in Iraq, creating personal connection that transformed Ashley's abstract discrimination into specific dishonor of heroic sacrifice. That Marine's prosthetic arm came from shielding other Marines during IED attack in Fallujah, Kim announced, while providing testimony that proved Maria's disability resulted from protecting other service members rather than personal misfortune deserving mockery. Ashley's emotional response revealed the impact of learning her discrimination had targeted genuine military hero. I didn't know. But Rodriguez corrected her understanding. Military service creates obligations for civilian respect regardless of your knowledge about individual service records. The revelation that Maria had literally sacrificed her arm protecting Marines created powerful emotional impact that transcended legal requirements to involve moral obligations that decent Americans maintained toward wounded veterans. Those 4 Marines she saved went on to complete their tours and return safely to their families because of her sacrifice. Kim continued while providing context that made Ashley's mockery obviously unpatriotic and morally reprehensible. Maria's response showed military humility. I was just doing my job. But the Marines corrected her modesty. Saving Marines' lives by sacrificing your own limb exceeds duty requirements. Your heroism deserves recognition and respect, not mockery from ignorant civilians. Ashley's discrimination faced complete collapse as Marine testimony established Maria's heroic service while creating educational moment that would influence civilian treatment of wounded veterans throughout the community. Ma'am, you owe this Marine an apology and immediate service, Rodriguez commanded while establishing consequences for discrimination that violated both legal protections and moral obligations that Americans owed wounded veterans. Ashley's attempt at apology revealed genuine remorse. "I'm so sorry. I didn't understand what your prosthetic meant." Her recognition of Maria's sacrifice created personal transformation from ignorant discrimination to respectful appreciation. The Marines' education extended beyond individual correction to systematic reform of civilian attitudes toward military sacrifice and disability rights that protected wounded veterans from discriminatory treatment. Military prosthetics represent American medical innovation that enables wounded veterans to continue contributing to communities they've sacrificed to protect. Rodriguez explained, while providing broader context for respecting, rather than mocking, advanced medical technology. Manager Dave Wilson appeared to investigate the commotion, immediately recognizing his employees' discrimination had created legal liability, while 4 Marines provided testimony about illegal treatment of wounded veteran whose sacrifice deserved corporate apology and policy reform. Ashley's education about military sacrifice created immediate policy changes, as Manager Wilson implemented disability awareness training, while the Marines' intervention established new standards for respecting wounded veterans in civilian establishments. Maria received corporate apology and free coffee for life, while Ashley faced disciplinary action and mandatory education about disability rights and military service that would prevent future discrimination. The incident's viral video created national conversation about veteran treatment, while the Marines' intervention demonstrated military brotherhood that protected wounded veterans from civilian ignorance. Most importantly, Ashley's transformation from discriminatory ignorance to respectful appreciation showed how education could overcome prejudice when delivered by qualified authorities who understood military sacrifice. Ashley's discrimination and subsequent education by 4 Marines created immediate policy changes at Coastal Coffee, as management implemented mandatory disability awareness training while establishing protocols for respectfully serving wounded veterans and disabled customers. The viral video of Marine intervention attracted national attention to veteran treatment issues, while Ashley's transformation from ignorant discrimination to respectful appreciation demonstrated how education could overcome civilian prejudice about military sacrifice and disability rights. Maria received corporate compensation and public recognition, while the Marines' intervention established precedent for military personnel protecting wounded veterans from civilian discrimination through education rather than confrontation. Local veterans organizations used the incident to create awareness campaigns about respecting military sacrifice, while coffee shops throughout the military community implemented policies specifically designed to honor rather than discriminate against wounded veterans. Ashley kept her job after completing extensive disability awareness training while becoming advocate for veteran rights and inclusive customer service that recognized sacrifice rather than mocking difference. 2 years later, Ashley's education became catalyst for nationwide corporate training programs about serving wounded veterans and disabled customers with dignity and respect that recognized sacrifice rather than focusing on physical differences. The Marines' intervention influenced military-civilian relations as their professional education demonstrated how service members could protect wounded veterans while improving civilian understanding of military sacrifice and disability rights. Coffee shop chains nationwide adopted Operation Respect protocols specifically designed for serving wounded veterans, while Ashley's story became training material for customer service. Representatives who worked near military installations. Military advocacy organizations used the incident to create educational partnerships with civilian businesses, teaching customer service standards that honored rather than mocked military sacrifice while protecting wounded veterans from discriminatory treatment. The case established precedent for military intervention in civilian discrimination cases, while demonstrating how unit cohesion extended to protecting wounded veterans from ignorant civilian treatment that violated both legal protections and moral obligations. Maria evolved from discrimination victim to respected advocate whose dignity under attack inspired community support, while demonstrating how wounded veterans could maintain honor despite civilian ignorance about military sacrifice. Her prosthetic arm became symbol of heroism rather than disability, as the Marine's testimony educated the community about combat injuries that represented service rather than limitation requiring mockery or discrimination. My prosthetic tells a story of service, not disability. Maria often explains to civilian audiences. Understanding that story helps communities recognize sacrifice and show appropriate respect for wounded veterans who continue serving despite their injuries. Maria's story proves that military sacrifice deserves civilian recognition and respect, while Ashley's transformation demonstrates how education can overcome ignorance when delivered by qualified authorities who understand the true meaning of prosthetic limbs earned through heroic service to protect American freedoms. Epilogue. Today, Maria Santos operates the Wounded Veteran Advocacy Center near Camp Pendleton, where her prosthetic arm serves as inspiration for newly injured service members, while her story educates civilian businesses about serving wounded veterans with dignity and respect. Ashley Miller became the center's first civilian volunteer, using her experience to train customer service representatives about recognizing and honoring military sacrifice rather than mocking physical differences that represent heroism. The corner table where 4 Marines witnessed discrimination now bears a plaque honoring military brotherhood that protects wounded veterans, while Coastal Coffee's corporate training program uses Ashley's transformation as proof that education can overcome ignorance when qualified military personnel take time to explain the true meaning of prosthetic limbs earned through combat service. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and his Marines continue their service while knowing their intervention that day changed not just one barista's attitude, but an entire community's understanding of how to properly honor those who sacrifice limbs to protect American freedoms that civilians exercise daily without understanding their true cost, or the heroes who paid that price through personal sacrifice that deserves recognition rather than mockery from those whose safety was purchased through wounds that became prosthetic reminders of service above self.